right. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good afternoon. This webinar was slated to start at 2, so let's kind of get going. And, I want to thank everybody for joining us. So my name is Erica Tutko, and I am a senior R&D consultant here at Layton. I work with a number of companies in the food and beverage industry and help them claim for the research and development tax credit. So hopefully you will find some value in today's webinar. Also joining me today, I have one of our technical consultants, Allison Mitchell. Allison, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Erica. So hi, everyone. My name is Allison. I'm a technical consultant here at Layton. My background is actually in chemical engineering, so that kind of directly feeds into the manufacturing process, and I work with a lot of food and beverage clients here at Layton. My role as a technical consultant is to be working directly with businesses to understand the activities that have been going on and to pinpoint what would be qualifying research activities for the credit and what would not. And I also work in tandem with our team of financial consultants to actually go about substantiating your credit.
Thank you, Allison. And Allison's going to be talking a little bit later towards the end of the presentation about some of the companies that we work with currently in the food and beverage industry. So I'm going to take you through the presentation. It should take about 25 minutes, and then we have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then there'll also be some time for some questions at the end if you have any questions. So if you can just save your questions to the end, that would be greatly appreciated. And I will get going. So today we are going to go over what the R&D credit is, what expenses are eligible to claim for the credit. We're going to go over some areas of R&D in food and bev and what qualifies for the credit. We're also going to explain how you can claim the credit and how we can help. And then, as I mentioned, additionally, we're going to go over a few case studies from some current clients, and we'll have some time for some Q&A. So what is the R&D tax credit? So the Research and Development Tax Credit was designed as an incentive for U.S. companies to increase research spending. The credit was initially established as a temporary tax incentive in the 80s, and it was finally made permanent as a tax regulation in 2015. The reason being, initially only larger companies were taking advantage of the credit because when it was first introduced, it was introduced as a 2-year incentive. So it didn't really make sense for smaller companies to commit the time and resources into calculating the credit if it wasn't a sure bet to be renewed. In 2015, through the PATH Act, the credit was made a permanent tax regulation. So this made the credit a sure bet, something that companies can take advantage of year after year and include in their business plans, which many of our clients do. Additionally, when it was made permanent, it was broadened to include early stage companies. So we'll dive into how the credit can help established companies as well as early stage startup companies a little later in the discussion. The reason behind the R&D tax credit is basically, it's a government incentive to reward companies for creating or incorporating new technology and techniques and processes into their businesses. So big benefit of the credit is that it does create, it frees up some cash to create jobs in the US and keep the jobs in the US. The purpose of the credit is also to help stimulate the economy by adding those jobs and keeping those jobs in the US. And this is a credit that the government wants companies to take advantage of. So what does this mean for your business? So the credit can provide an immediate reduction in your company's income taxes or in your payroll taxes. And I'll explain how it does that a little bit later on. And additionally, if you can't use the credits immediately, you can bank the credits to use against future income tax liability. So again, a good way to free up some cash for your business. So how do you qualify for the credit? So the IRS has put in place a 4-part test that your company must meet to qualify. So the first part of the test is a new or improved product or process. So it doesn't need to be new to the world. It just needs to be new to your company, or a product or process that you've already have at your company that you're improving. The second piece of the test is elimination of uncertainty. So you need to basically eliminate any uncertainty, which I'll get into a little later. The third part of the test is there needs to be a process of experimentation. And the fourth part of the test is that it needs to be technological in nature. So it needs to have an application of one of the hard scientists or one of the hard sciences. So I'm going to kind of give a simple example about how the 4-part test pertains to a food company. So let's just say you own a bread company and you want to provide a gluten-free option. So the newer improved business component, this is the first gluten-free offering in your line of bread that your company sells to various food distributors. The technological in nature part of the test is the baking process itself is based on the chemistry of the ingredients. Process of experimentation. So it took several recipe modifications to create a viable product. We went through a process of focus groups, regulation testing, ingredient sourcing to come up with the final product. So this is where you'll get the experimentation by trying a few different ways to get to that final product. The technical uncertainty of the bread was, this was the first time our team was going to try a gluten-free option, and it was unknown at the time if the product would be able to maintain its texture, its quality, and its flavor, and if it would satisfy the consumer needs due to the drastic change in ingredients that was required. So it's important to note that once you go through the 4-part test, that the product does not need to go to market. So that bread could have been, disgusting, and you didn't think it was good and you didn't want to sell it, but you've still gone through that whole process. So it's a good way to recoup costs for for failed projects that you might not necessarily have gone to market. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. So what can be claimed? So you meet the 4-part test, and we've gone over some of the eligible activities. Now, what can be claimed? What are the qualifying costs that we're looking at cost-wise? So there's a number of different costs that we look at, and we look at the total amount of money that you're spending on R&D each year. So the first category that we look at is your W-2 salaries. We take a look at the wages of those involved. So it could be somebody whose job is 100% dedicated to recipe and new development, or it could be somebody who's supervising that person. It could also be somebody like a part-time brewer who's maybe only devoting, 20-30% of their time to R&D. So we would take a look at all of those salaries. The second cost category is subcontracting and 1099 costs. So those costs of those subcontractor costs can be claimed at a 65% rate. So if you're subbing out your manufacturing costs or lab costs, or you're having somebody do some testing on your food, those are eligible expenses. So the next category that we look at is raw materials and supplies. So testing different ingredients and recipe development, or maybe you're testing out a different line of packaging for longer shelf life. Those are some areas that we look at as well. And the final category is computers. So you don't necessarily always find this in food and beverage companies, although in some manufacturing companies that we work with, they have actually developed their own internal software that they're using. So that's something that we could look at as well. So, if we do end up talking to you and that's something that you've done, please let us know. If you're unsure about any qualifying costs, we can absolutely have a meeting and determine what's eligible and what's not eligible. So how can you benefit? So if you are paying income tax or you're paying payroll tax, so FICA tax, you can potentially benefit. So the R&D tax credit reduces your income tax liability for your current tax year. So we're filing taxes for 2020. So it would reduce your income tax liability for 2020 in the form of a credit. If you've never claimed the R&D tax credit before, the IRS does allow us to look back 3 years prior. So we'd be looking at 2017, 2018, and 2019. And for those 3 years, if you're profitable, and you've paid income taxes on those 3 years, we would actually be able to help you receive a refund for overpaid income taxes for those 3 years. And if you haven't been profitable those 3 years, that's fine. You can also recoup those costs in the form of a credit. The credit does roll over for up to 20 years. So you'd be able to take advantage of that credit for years to come. So it's really good to look at, especially, if you've done a lot of R&D in 2017 and you want to recoup some of those costs. It's a really good benefit being able to look back through those 3 years. So the credit can obviously be very valuable for companies who've never claimed before, especially, now during COVID, because you can get some much needed cash back. And it's also important to mention that the credit is also available on both a federal and a state level. So not all states, but most states, and it varies from state to state. But again, we're happy to talk to you and explain what the benefit is in your state. So that is the regular R&D tax credit. The subset of the R&D tax credit is the payroll tax credit. So the payroll tax credit is, we look at the same cost categories. We do the same cost calculations based off your qualifying activities and your associated costs, but the payroll tax credit will offset your payroll taxes, so your FICA taxes. So this credit, this subset of the credit is designed to benefit younger companies with no or very small income tax liability. So there are a few restrictions around the payroll tax credit. And again, we're happy to review that in detail with you, but typically it's geared towards companies that are 5 years old or less. You cannot have any revenue more than 5 million in the current tax year. And there's a limit of 250K that you can claim for the credit. With the regular R&D credit, there is no limit. You can claim, if you've got 5 million in eligible expenses, you can claim that. So, kind of just to give you an idea of how the payroll tax credit works. So if you have $1,000 in FICA taxes a quarter and you're eligible for a $4,000 payroll credit, you can effectively eliminate your payroll tax liability for that year, as you'd pay it every quarter. And we can help work with your payroll provider just to make sure that they are aware that you have the credit and that they are deducting the credit from your taxes. Because this is a permanent credit, this is a credit that you can take advantage of every year. You can write it into your business plans. It's very, you can be a early stage food company and you can start out by taking advantage of the payroll tax credit. And once your eligibility is over for that credit, you can start taking advantage of the R&D tax credit. And again, here at Layton, we're happy to have a conversation with you, figure out which of the credits you are eligible for, and we can work with you on that. So here are a list of some of the types of food and beverage companies that we work with. I'm not going to go through them all, but We work with a lot of breweries, a lot of beverage companies, a lot of food manufacturing and food processing companies, as well as ag tech companies. We've just recently started working with a lot of CBD infused food and beverage companies as well. And obviously, I'm sure everyone is aware, plant-based alternatives is a really big trend these past couple of years. So we do work with a lot of companies that are plant-based alternative companies as well. Also, probably important to note that it doesn't have to be a food and beverage company. We do work with companies in over 60 different sectors at Layton to help them claim. So companies in construction, dental is a huge area that we work in, software. So, if you have friends that work at other companies that are interested in claiming the credit, we can absolutely help them as well. So some potential areas of R&D in food and beverage, and there's a lot. So this is just a very short list. Areas of food improvements, if you're trying to make something, as we talked about the gluten, if you're trying to incorporate, or if you're trying to make something gluten-free, if you're trying to make something low fat, any process improvements that you're doing on the manufacturing lines, if you're working on some kind of innovative packaging to make a product last longer on the shelf, sustainability efforts, anything you're kind of putting towards sustainability efforts is probably going to qualify for the credit. If you're improving texture or content of food, the product formulations, integrating a new ingredient into a recipe, improving your processing equipment to ensure handling of food, improving productivity and cost efficiency, creating, as I said, new packaging to improve shelf life, incorporating a new or improved equipment into the production lines, anything like that, any experimental recipe development that you're doing are areas that are going to qualify. And again, happy to walk you through it if you're unsure. So now that we've gone over the credit and what the credit is and what value the credit is, we at Layton can help you claim. So the first step to working with us is having an initial conversation, understanding what credit you qualify for. As I mentioned, are you eligible for the regular R&D tax credit, or are you a younger company eligible for the payroll tax credit? And then we want to find out how your business is structured and figure out if it's the right time for you to take advantage of the credits. The next step would be to introduce you to the food science team and the food and beverage manufacturing team. So we would have a call, introduce you to them. They're the ones that would be doing your study. There'd be a high-level conversation to understand at a more technical level where the R&D is. The next step would be for us to start writing your report. So what we do at Layton, we do take a unique approach in that we have a dedicated in-house team of highly experienced scientists, engineers, tax accountants, and tax attorneys, all of whom are very motivated to help you in your business robustly claim and realize the R&D tax credit to incentivize further innovation and investment. And basically kind of how we look at it, you guys, if you guys have some skin in the game, we have some skin in the game too. And I think I've touched on this before. We do encourage and work with our clients to claim the credit every year. Again, it's a really great benefit that the government's encouraging companies to use, and it encourages innovation and job creation in the US. We can help build the credit into your business plans year after year, and there's ways that we can help you maximize the credit and structure your business so that you're taking full advantage of the credit. So as you work with us, you'll gain more knowledge of the legislation around the credit. We'll share best practices with you on how to better claim, keep track of the credit, So it's easier for you to identify what qualifies and claim every year. A little bit about Layton. We have over 20 years experience in helping companies claim for the R&D tax credit. We have 24,000 clients and offices in 12 different countries. Our US headquarters is in Boston, and we also have an office in San Francisco as well. So now I'm actually going to hand over the call to Allison, and she is going to go over some of the case studies and some of the companies that we work with in food and beverage. Allison?
Yeah, thank you, Erica. All right, so as Erica mentioned, we have worked with a number of food and beverage relevant clients, all the way from the agricultural side of things to your upstream and downstream processing, all the way to packaging and transportation. So I'll be stepping through a few different cases that my colleagues and I have had the pleasure of working on while I've been at Layton. So this first company is a well-established, larger size company in nutraceutical manufacturing. This particular client is a private label company involved in ingredient distribution, contract manufacturing, and contract research and development. They develop a variety of vitamins, sports and energy drink powders, sweeteners, herbal products, you name it. They're all over the board developing a vast number of products. So you can see a couple of the qualifying projects we identified for them are listed here. So one of the projects that we identified as qualifying for them was associated with their product formulation. As you can imagine, getting contracted to develop all these different kinds of products and then manufacture some of these, there was lots of R&D going on. So the scope of these R&D activities ranged from ensuring the product itself was effective by tracking and testing different metrics like active ingredient concentration, excipient concentrations, particle size, etc., and evaluating different methods of delivery, not just the formulation of the product itself, but how to best encapsulate this product, what form to best and most effectively deliver that active ingredient. So liquid, capsule, tablet forms, etc. So on top of the product formulations, we also looked to qualify projects associated with process optimization and improvements there. So generating any new protocols for more efficient production of those new formulations, tracking production parameters for machinery for each unit operation, like temperature, speed, pressure, residence time. As Erica was kind of speaking on earlier, one part of the 4-part test is making sure that you have those uncertainties there. And typically we look at uncertainties in the form of capability, methodology, or design. She kind of touched on that one uncertainty about the uncertainty related to capability. Are we going to be able to make our desired product? But there's also a lot of uncertainties just in the process itself. Like, what is the best temperature that we're going to need to maintain this unit operation at what speed do we need our mixers at what pressure do we need to actually achieve that desired product? And all of these kind of activities are relevant for the R&D tax credit. And we were able to, over their study years, which were from 2016 to 2019 so far, get them a total benefit of $200K, which is great. Erica, you can go on to the next case study. All right, so kind of at the other end of the spectrum, this is a very young company. They were just established in 2015. They only have 9 employees so far, but they've done a great job to grow since then. This is one of our kombucha clients. So they have a lot of R&D going on as well at all levels, from process development, flavor development, packaging design, and even production line development. As a very young company, you know, that's essential, and they all were getting their hands dirty in some kind of R&D project. So you can go back to the, thank you. Okay, so making kombucha is a process that needs to be very precisely controlled. And this company spent a lot of time understanding the effects of production parameters and batch conditions on those variables. Some of the metrics that they were tracking were, you know, starter characteristics, sugar levels, alcohol levels, and pH. And one important project that surrounded their, metric tracking was that they wanted to develop in-house methods for monitoring some of these metrics. A lot of companies nowadays we're seeing kind of want to transition to more in-house analytical testing rather than sending their samples out for really expensive third-party analytical testing, especially now a lot of CBD companies that are making CBD food or beverages with very stringent regulations surrounding the amount of CBD that can be in foods or beverages, and at what stage in the process they're allowing certain percentages. In-house analytical method development has been huge lately for those companies, as well as just all the food and beverage development and manufacturing companies that we've been working with. So another important project to point out surrounding in this company and their R&D was workflow optimization. So for companies like this, let's say they have one production line or two production lines and multiple products, what's the best way to operate these to optimize product development while still ensuring the quality of the product? Or do they want to scale? Do they maybe want to build a whole nother production line? These are all things that lead to huge amounts of R&D and qualifying R&D within these companies. So we were able to get them from their 2016 to 2019 study of 45K benefit, and we're also working with them again this year to get them their highest credit ever, which is probably going to be in the range of $10,000 to $20,000, which is going to be huge for them. They're a growing company, and they're taking the most advantage of the credit that's available to them. Especially with the pandemic hitting hard, hitting businesses hard this year, the R&D tax credit has been a huge resource for companies like this to recoup some of the costs and reinvest it into their team and in their business. We've seen that some companies, even such as this one that I just discussed, the kombucha company, have had more time to do R&D on their internal processes and process optimization as orders have slowed a bit during 2020, enabling them to claim a higher credit that's associated with more R&D and more expenses. We also see all kinds of companies in the food and beverage industry, manufacturing industry, getting innovative, trying to adapt to this new remote and safety-focused climate that has become really imperative during this pandemic and these unprecedented times. So really, there is no better time for you to be looking into the benefits of the R&D tax credit through these innovations. And at Layton, we definitely take a lot of pride in being able to work with companies and help them get the most out of the R&D tax credit.